Dobrodošli u agendu Svijet. Svijet se ubrzano promijenio u 2025. iako velike promjene pratimo zapravo već godinama unatrag. Dok se uz pritisak američke administracije pokušava zaustaviti rat na istoku Europe, a prekoatlantsko savezništvo čini se krhkim nego ikada od kraja Drugog svjetskog rata, postavljaju se brojna pitanja i izazovi pred Europsku uniju. Što čeka blok od 27 zemalja? Potrudit ćemo se doznati od dugogodišnjeg čelnog čovjeka Briselskog centra za studije europske politike, jednog od vodećih takvih think-tankova u svijetu, gospodina Karela Lannoa. Mr. Lannoo, welcome to our program.
Thank you.
A za početak pogledajmo prvo koja su to temeljna pitanja s kojima se u ovom trenutku susreće Europska unija. U prilogu kolege Mire Aščića.
Razilaženje Sjedinjenih Američkih Država i Europske unije, višedesetljetnih saveznika, velikim se dijelom događa zbog rata u Ukrajini. Razlike su došle do izražaja i na posljednjem samitu Europskog vijeća u Briselu. Dok SAD intenzivno radi na završetku rata, pa i po cijenu predaje dijela ukrajinskog teritorija Rusiji, europski čelnici inzistiraju na povlačenju svih ruskih snaga s okupiranog ukrajinskog teritorija, uključujući Krim. Države članice pozvane su da hitno povećaju vojnu pomoć Ukrajini.
All these instruments, the save, more fiscal space, flexibilities on the use of cohesion funds, all of these give room to the member states to increase their support to Ukraine.
Iako je potpisao završnu izjavu, slovački premijer Robert Fico ne šalje niti planira slati vojnu pomoć Ukrajini. Jedini koji nije stavio potpis na zaključnu izjavu i koji cijelo vrijeme pokušava spriječiti vojnu pomoć Ukrajini jest mađarski premijer Viktor Orban.
Nem kell megijedni attól, hogy egyedül vagyunk, mert előfordul, hogy mégis kiderül, hogy nekünk van igazunk. Ugyanez a történet játszódik most a háborúban. Tehát én már látom a szemekben, hogy mindenki látja, hogy ez a háború elveszett. Tehát rossz döntés volt beleugrani. A magyaroknak volt igazuk, ahogy az oroszok megtámadták Ukrajnát, meg kellett volna próbálni azonnal a konfliktust elszigetelni, megállapodni, és nem kiterjeszteni a háborút.
Trumpova stajališta izjave prema EU i NATO potaknuli su pitanje veće europske samostalnosti u obrani. Europski čelnici podržali su plan Europske komisije o ponovnom naoružavanju. Predviđeno je da će članice EU-a do 2030. osloboditi 800 milijardi eura za obranu. Kako bi se osigurao toliki iznos, ublažena su stroga proračunska pravila i omogućeno veće zaduživanje, što je izazvalo niz kritika zbog prezaduženosti pojedinih zemalja.
If Europe wants to avoid war, Europe must get ready for war.
U bijeloj knjizi o budućnosti europske obrane, koju je prihvatio Europski parlament, stoji da će se o budućnosti Europe odlučivati na ukrajinskim bojištima. Ako Ukrajina bude prisiljena na predaju, zaključuje se, Rusija bi se mogla okrenuti protiv drugih zemalja, uključujući i neke članice EU-a.
International order is undergoing changes of a magnitude not seen since 1945. This is a pivotal moment for European security. It is a pivotal moment for action.
EU planira u prvom redu oslanjati se na vlastitu obrambenu industriju kako bi se smanjila ovisnost o vanjskim dobavljačima i potaknulo europsko gospodarstvo. Dionice europskih proizvođača oružja, poput njemačkog diva Rheinmetalla, drastično su porasle, no izazov ostaje kapacitet vojno-industrijskog sektora.
È giusto che l'Europa si attrezzi per fare la propria parte, ma è nella migliore delle ipotesi ingenuo, nella peggiore folle, pensare che oggi possa fare da sola, senza la NATO, fuori da quella cornice euroatlantica che per 75 anni ha garantito la sicurezza dell'Europa e che in questi ultimi 3 anni ha consentito all'Ucraina di resistere.
U Saudijskoj Arabiji održan je drugi krug pregovora SAD-a s Ukrajinom i Rusijom. Glavni Trumpov pregovarač Steve Witkoff komentirao je izjave europskih lidera o mogućem ruskom napadu na Europu.
I simply have said that I just don't see that he wants to take all of Europe. This is a much different situation than it was in World War II. In World War II there was no NATO. So you have countries that are armed there. to me, it just does. I take him at his word in this sense. So, and I think the Europeans are beginning to come to that belief too.
Pukotine u transatlantskom savezništvu postale su vidljive još za vrijeme prvog Trumpova mandata, a njegovim povratkom u ovalni ured dodatno su se produbile. Trump EU vidi više kao ekonomskog konkurenta nego kao partnera, te je odlučniji nego ikad prije u provođenju svojih trgovinskih politika.
They put obstacles in your way that you can do nothing about. But if you take a look at what happens, so we sell no cars to Europe, I mean virtually no cars, and they sell millions of cars to us. They don't take our agriculture, we take their agriculture. It's like a one-way street with them. The European Union is very, very nasty. They sue our companies.
Američke carine od 25% na uvoz čelika i aluminija iz svih zemalja, uključujući EU, potaknule su Brisel na uvođenje protumjera u vrijednosti 26 milijardi eura na američke proizvode poput govedine i viskija, međutim njihova primjena privremeno je odgođena.
We are in active discussion with the US administration on this issue, and I can confirm that we decided to adjust the timing of the entry into force of tariffs.
Trump je u međuvremenu zaprijetio carinama od 200% na šampanjac i druga europska alkoholna pića, što je izazvalo pad dionica europskih proizvođača vina. Također je najavio plan za uvođenje carina od 25% na sav uvoz iz EU-a, uključujući automobile.
April 2nd is a liberating day for our country. We're going to be getting back some of the wealth that very, very foolish presidents gave away because they had no clue what they were doing.
Europska unija i SAD ostaju najveći trgovinski partneri na svijetu s godišnjom razmjenom od 1,3 bilijuna dolara. Nadomjestiti američko tržište bio bi dugotrajan i složen proces, pa EU pokušava izbjeći trgovinski rat, ali i diversificirati partnere kako bi smanjio ovisnost o američkom tržištu. Kina je drugi najveći trgovinski partner, ali prepreke su političke tenzije, dok su Indija, Vijetnam i Indonezija brzo rastuća tržišta s velikim potrošačkim potencijalom.
So, Mr. Lannoo, there's been obviously a lot of development since Donald Trump took Oval Office. And could you tell us, in your opinion, what are the most important consequences for EU and Europe as a whole? And we obviously now have to deal not only with the internal problems of European Union, Ukrainian war, but now we have this tariff war with United States, some say, and extended defense spending right now. Do you see that European leaders, EU leaders were prepared for this, or they will sort of taken aback with the speed of processes that are ongoing right now?
I think we were totally taken aback, even if we were talking about the possible presidency of Trump since almost a year. You can simply see that the Commission is totally, and the EU in total, but also member states are totally taken aback and are not prepared how to deal with this. They are prepared on one front, which is for trade policy, and you may have seen that 2 weeks ago they have announced tariffs. But on the broader situation, let's say that the US would no longer be part of a close partnership, a transatlantic partnership with the EU, that they hadn't imagined at all. And the statements like even yesterday, for example, saying that all the ships passing through the Suez Canal is mostly for European traffic and that the Americans shouldn't be protecting, for example, the Red Sea because it's mostly for the Europeans. These kind of things have been continuing now for the last 2 or 3 weeks, since I think the 3rd of March, since the United States said we will no longer send in to protect and to help Ukraine and to provide them the security information and the intelligence. So it's totally taken aback, and you see until today that the US say the EU doesn't know how to react. Of course, there's a positive side of that. Let's say a very important positive side is that Germany changed its fiscal policy and changed the Schuldenbremse, meaning that Germany, by a constitutional change, which required a 2/3 majority, has changed the legislation which limited the amount which Germany could borrow on the international capital market, which they have not changed, that Germany can now borrow much more than they can do in the past, which is something which was unimaginable even 2 months ago, that this would change so rapidly, which for Europe, on the other hand, is then a good sign, because that means that Germany will invest a lot of money for its infrastructure, but also for its army, which will take the European economy forward. And that's what you see as the reaction in the exchanges, for example, in the stock markets, since a few weeks.
With all of that you just said, do you think that we should consider United States still as a full-time partner as we did in the previous decades?
And that is still what I think many policymakers hope, that we can still consider them as a partner, but the longer it lasts, the less it is likely they can still be a partner. And that is extremely important, because the more this policy goes on for months and months in the current administration, the more, for example, the next administration will do the same. And of course, we don't know now what will happen under an eventual next administration. It's only 2 months in the Trump administration. But for example, if Vance takes over as the president, which we'll only know in 3 years or 3.5 years, whether he could become a president, it will certainly be a continuation, if even worse than it is today.
In what ways could this affect internal policies of our political landscape in Europe? Will we see the rise of these populist parties, right-wing parties, the new non-mainstream parties, or maybe, as some believe, this could reverse these processes?
That one I did not know exactly. Of course, I referred already to the change which we see in Germany, but it's difficult to say whether it will bring Europe closer together. As we see it today, yes. But for example, if the Baltic countries, take Poland, take Romania, need the security guarantee, and if they don't have it from Europe at the moment, they may negotiate bilaterally with the Americans to continue to have a security guarantee, security backstop, if, for example, Russia has kind of some aggressive actions against these countries. So that is difficult to say at the moment, but it looks like if Europe takes the right decisions now on, for example, the security and defense side, but also on the international relations side, to become much more of one homogeneous bloc, then it could be that, we will kind of disconnect clearly from the United States, and we will become a third bloc. You will have the United States, Europe, and then China.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about some of the European and European Union leaders who are obviously very happy to have Donald Trump and his policies right now. Obviously, that Mr. Orban is one of them, or maybe at the forefront of all of them, but also Slovakian Prime Minister Fico. We have to mention even the President of Serbia, Mr. Vučić, who the country is still in the process of, as a candidate, in the process of enlargement. But anyway, this is very close, especially to us in Croatia. Do you consider these people that are some sort of allies of Donald Trump and his policies?
I think the only one which is a real ally of Trump is Orban, and Orban has clearly got close relations with Trump since quite some time. But even Orban, this has to be qualified, because if Orban and Hungary needs financial aid, it comes from the EU. He will not get financial aid from the United States, because the US is very pricky on its money at the moment. Of course, he could get financial aid from Russia, but that I don't believe that will signify a lot. That's why Orban is kind of vocally or rhetorically extremely active, but when it comes to real actions, he remains fairly in line with the EU. The best example is all the sanctions which we have adopted against Russia. We have adopted 14 packages of sanctions, and Hungary has each time voted with the rest of the EU member states, which are packages which have to be adopted by unanimity, because it's concerned foreign policy. So again, take these things with a big grain of salt. Of course, it is annoying for the EU that there is somebody which is basically like a Trojan horse in the EU. And that's what, for example, von der Leyen already said 2 years ago. But so far, yes, we have gone on functioning, we have gone on acting against Russia, even with Orban.
You already mentioned the defensive guarantees for the Eastern European countries in first place, Poland, Romania, and so on. But European Union just launched the big project of Rearm Europe. Obviously, it's now had to do something that it didn't want to do in the past, to become a military power. Do you believe that this requires some changes within the system, especially this defensive architecture of Europe, that we need more centralized, let's say, military leadership for European Union?
And that is the big question which we have now, whether we do this in the NATO context or the NATO without the United States, whether we do it in an EU context or whether we do it in another European context, because we have the UK as a big country with an important military. And if we were to create a structure which would be really functional and adapted to quick military actions, we couldn't do it, I think, as we have it today with 27. We would basically have something like what they call a Security Council, a limited number of large member states, like, for example, of course, France, UK, Germany, probably Spain and Italy, that we don't know, probably Poland, and then the big question, what do we do with Turkey? To basically create a security alliance to protect Europe. Because if we have to rely on smaller member states, which would have an equal vote to decide on an action, take the Baltic states, take Malta, take Cyprus, of course, then you have a problem. So that is a problem at the moment. So you could have three different constellations, and it's totally unsure what we will see. A lot will depend on the United States and on the action they take in the context of NATO. And we'll have the Hague summit in June, the NATO summit, which will take place in the Netherlands, which will most likely be the indicator in which direction we will go.
Apart from that defensive questions of defense of Europe, there's been a lot of talks in the past years for need to reform some of the ways of where European Union functions right now. But do you think that this is more required now, and this processes that is ongoing around Europe could speed up these processes, even that we may talk about changes of the treaty?
Yes, it is possible, but I don't think it will happen too rapidly. Of course, if we see the last 2 months or the last 3 months, it's enormous what has changed already, and what is debatable now, what was not debatable 2 months ago. I refer to this Schuldenbremse in Germany, that Germany reformed its constitution. But the fact that we're discussing about a security structure without the United States is also unheard of until 2 months ago. So who knows that in 2 months from now, or in 5 or 6 months from now, what we are discussing. So things are at the moment changing extremely rapidly. We know this quote, was it from Churchill or from Einstein, who said, let's say there are sometimes years that nothing happens and nothing changes, and then a lot changes in a matter of a few weeks or months, which in the other case doesn't happen over years. Mm-hmm. So we are now in a period of acceleration of history that we will see probably in a few months other structures emerging. But to some degree, the Americans are reacting to something which Europeans should have done already years ago, to take greater interest for their own security and not to rely, not to be a vassal like in the Middle Ages of basically the protection of the United States.
And let's talk a little bit about economy. You already mentioned a couple of times Germany, which is the biggest economy, one of the biggest in the world right now, but it doesn't do well for some time right now. Do you believe that all these processes will make European Union economy suffer even more, or maybe some changes as we talk about defense and everything else could speed up and make reforms and make things much better?
I think the changes, that's why I mentioned this fiscal policy change in Germany, that Germany will borrow much more money on the markets to finance its reconversion of its economy towards, sorry to say, a war economy, to have a much better infrastructure. Every European knows how difficult it is to take a train in Germany, how many delays there are, how many works you have eternally in their road networks. These things will be changed. And of course, this is a big impulse to the economy, not only of Germany, but of many of the surrounding countries. I think about the Benelux, about Denmark, but also about Slovakia, Czech Republic, etc. All these countries will be affected because they are so closely anchored onto the German economy. And we shouldn't forget that Germany is 25% of the EU's GDP. I believe, as what we've seen about 20 years ago with the then problem of Germany, which was the sick man of Europe, we have it a bit again today, that Germany will reform, will adapt, and in 2 to 3 years from now will be the leading economy again of the EU because of this massive injection, which we'll see of money as well.
Let's say that we have a ceasefire or even some peace agreement in Ukraine. Do you believe that enlargement of European Union could become a thing again? Because we obviously had it frozen for some time now, right now.
Yeah, but we've seen the same with, for example, Turkey. Turkey was close to become a member in 2005, and all of a sudden, because of political developments, Turkey didn't move on. And now, only since a few months, except what happened earlier this week, we thought that, because of our security situation, we need to think about having a closer relationship with Turkey. I think the same with Ukraine. Of course, Ukraine has a very difficult geopolitical position. We started negotiations formally with Ukraine. I think in earnest that because the Americans are so serious about having an agreement between, say, with Russia, or forcing agreement between Russia and Ukraine, that there will be some form of a new structure. But I think the membership situation between the EU and Ukraine will go on. We have other neutral countries within the EU. Take, for example, Ireland, take Austria, which are neutral. We had until recently also Finland and Sweden, which have become members of NATO. So it's perfectly possible, if we have a security form of a guarantee for Ukraine, that Ukraine can become a member of the EU without becoming a member of NATO. And as we just discussed, it's not sure that the NATO will continue the way it is. But what Ukraine will have to have absolutely for sure is a guarantee that its security situation could never be undermined, as it has been undermined for the last 10 years.
Yes, I actually meant about every other country that is right now candidate for some time, let's say Serbia, for over 15 years.
Exactly. The other countries which are close to Croatia, which is the Western Balkan countries. Yes. And we see that, for example, with Montenegro, the dossier is advancing. We see it as well with Northern Macedonia. I think these things will have to be settled very soon. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense anymore to speak about this. And Moldova is very clearly also on the path of membership, very close to Romania. So I think these things are go on. If the EU doesn't do it now, the EU is not serious with what it's promising. So the EU has to move forward. And von der Leyen has made us a clear commitment of her second mandate.
Mr. Lannoo, thank you very much for this interview.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Hvala i vama, cijenjene gledateljice i gledatelji. Bila je to još jedna Agenda Svijet. Do idućeg tjedna i sljedećeg izdanja. Hvala i doviđenja.